Welcome students. This session is for BA second year English Literature paper 2nd, and in this session I'll be continuing with the essay by G.K. Chesterton on the pleasures of no longer being very young. Before I start with the text, let us have a recap of my previous session. This essay on the pleasures of no longer being very young by G.K. Chesterton was written after the Great Economic Depression in the 1930s, when the new industrial economies had completely collapsed and modern man had learnt a lesson of being too proud of his knowledge. So in my previous session, I have talked about that how G.K. Chesterton gives example of America, which was considered as a city of gold, a vast El Dorado, and then it becomes as embarrassed as that of England. So he gives the example from these collapsed industrial economies, and he has pointed out to the fact that people have not learned anything from history or from proverbs, that riches do take themselves to wings and fly, that nothing remains constant in this ever-changing world. So he says that not learning a lesson from the history, or not learning a lesson from the practical wisdom of proverbs is due to the human beings being too proud of their knowledge. And he, in his essay, gives various examples of different proverbs that people are not able to understand when they are in their youth age, when they are very young, but as they grow old, as experience comes, they feel that yes, all these proverbs and maxims, they are not just dusty labels, rather they are full of practical wisdom. Now, coming to the text of this essay, let's continue. Chesterton writes that we had heard of the fall of Wolsey, which was like a crash of a huge palace, still faintly rumbling through the ages. Now, Wolsey is Thomas Wolsey, who was English political figure and cardinal of Roman Catholic Church during the reign of Henry VIII. Though very low born, he rose to the highest offices but had a sudden downfall. So he's comparing Wolsey to a crash of huge palace. Now he gives this example to show that how much fickle is fortune, that sometimes it takes a person from a very low level to the high levels, and then with the passage of time, this position cannot remain constant, and then a person again has to see a downfall. And he proved this with the example of Wolsey, who was born low, who reached to heights, officer heights, and then again saw a sudden downfall in his life. We had read of it in the words of Shakespeare, which possibly were not written by Shakespeare. He's saying that maybe Shakespeare has written this, maybe Shakespeare has not written this, but we have read about Wolsey and his fate. We had learned them and learned nothing from them. We have seen that how people in history, they have achieved a lot of fortune, a lot of fame, but at a point of time, misfortune has interfered in their life. We have learned it in a way that we have just memorized these incidents, but when it comes to the level of understanding, when it comes to the level of applying it into our practical day-to-day life, we had learned nothing from them. We had read 10,000 times to the point of tedium of the difference between Napoleon of Marengo and Napoleon of Moscow. He's also talking about Napoleon Bonaparte, was French military and political leader. He was Emperor of France, and he talks about two Napoleons. We, to the point of getting tired, have learned the difference between these two Napoleons, but we should never have expected Moscow if we had been looking at Marengo. To give an example, he says that our learning is quite one-sided. When we are learning something, when we are reading something, we do not apply our prior understanding, our prior experience to the present times. In the same manner, we do not apply history, we do not apply experiences from history into our day-to-day life. So this shows that we have learned a lot in our life, but basically we have learned on the level of understanding, on the level of practical applying of something, we have learned nothing at all. Chesterton further gives examples of Charles. He talks about Charles V resigned his crown, or that Charles I lost his head. He talks about Charles V, who was the greatest rulers of Europe, with his empire extending over Spain, Austria, Netherlands and Rome. And then he also talks about Charles I, who lost his head because the parliamentarian Oliver Cromwell revolted against him, and he was tried and he was beheaded. So these things are the happenings from history about Charles V or Charles I, and we should have duly remarked, after looking at the fate of these two powerful emperors, we could have duly remarked sit transit gloria mundi, and this is in Latin, which means that here passes the earthly glory. That means nothing is constant in this world. Everything comes to an end. All the glorious things in this world, they come to an end at a point of time after the incident, but not before it. But we are able to realize this. This realization comes very late in one's life. Only when one has experienced something, only then a person is able to relate from the past or from the history, but not before it. If a person could learn from history in a way that he may be able to be prepared for whatever has happened in history might also happen in his own life, but human nature is such that a person is able to relate to things only when he experiences those things in his own lifetime. So all these proverbs, only when one experiences them with the passage of time, only then people are able to find meaning into it. We had been told that Roman Empire declined, or that Spanish Empire disintegrated, but no German ever really applied it to German Empire, and no Briton to the British Empire. He further elaborates the same point, that from the history we know that Roman Empire or Spanish Empire, which were very strong and powerful empires, they declined at a point of time in history. But in the present times, if Germany is powerful, if Britain is powerful, they are never going to apply it to their own rule. They are not going to learn from history. They will not be knowing prior from the history that this power, this progress is not going to remain forever. It's not constant. There might be time in future that their empire, their power may also decline with the passage of time. So it's the thing that history people study, but they do not apply history to the present time, though there is a proverb that history repeats itself. The very repetition of these truths will sound like old, interminable repetition of the truisms. We know that these maxims, this history, they are generated from some truth, and it is something which is an interminable repetition of the truism. This is something which is going to keep on happening, keep on repeating itself. They are so true, they are so real, they are so much living that there is no possibility that they may not happen again. And yet, they are to me at this moment like amazing and startling discoveries, as if I have lived to see the dead proverbs come alive. But for people who have lived a life and who have seen these dead proverbs coming alive, that means who suddenly feel that things have again happened or history has repeated itself again, those are the moments of realization, and person suddenly becomes surprised and discovers that a person has lived long enough to experience that how the fortune is, the wheel of fortune keeps on moving, and how these truisms, these maxims which appear dead in the youth age, they suddenly become alive, they become meaningful, and a person is able to gain a lot of experience through these proverbs, and one feels that they are not something which should be rejected, rather These are some things, they are full of worldly wisdom that a person should keep on learning from these things of the past. Now, if we analyze these two paragraphs, we see that Proverbs and human history offer us practical wisdom, but people fail to understand that wisdom. People don't understand from Proverbs and history. Proverbs are repeatedly used because they are practical. By the downfall of emperors like Napoleon, Alexander, and the great Roman, modern man does not learn anything from these examples. It is not the fault of young people that they must understand the importance of old things. For the young people, old things are on different level of understanding. He says that a lot of things that have happened in history, and there's so many examples from history, but young people, they are not able to understand anything from history, and it is not their fault that they are not able to understand. The only problem is that the level of understanding of young people is quite different from that of the old people. Since old people have the experience of life, they can better understand the real meaning of everything. Because old people have lived life long enough to see how these proverbs and this history is repeating itself, only because of their experience, they are able to understand life and history and their present condition in a better manner in comparison to the young people. Thanks for this session. I will continue with this essay in my next session.